And I had met a girl who worked for the same company. She was leaving the company and moving to Chicago. So I said, well, I'll come see you in Chicago. So I went back, sold all my stuff, and just showed up. But she didn't kick me out. So, and later we got married. So I guess it's okay. I just moved to Chicago and I was looking for a job in Chicago. There were several game companies in town. I interviewed with a few of them and I got a few job offers, but one company was not a game company and I was a little burned out after Harpoon. A long crunch, a very intense kind of post-launch, very, rapid content schedule. And there was this one company called Prism Interactive that was doing R&D on, of all things, MPEG and JPEG, which nobody at that time had heard of because they weren't out in the world. And so it was an R&D thing, and they needed somebody to be a Mac programmer to work on the sound stuff, mostly on the user interface of the sound stuff, not even on the algorithm. So I said, oh, well, this will be a nice, easy programming job. I'm sick of management. I've had a lot of responsibility for a long time. I just want to be a good programmer. 3 months later, I'm running the office of like 40 people. And, this wasn't like my plan in any way, shape, or form. And not only did we work on software, we also did chips. So now I had hardware chip people working for me, trying to build chips that had JPEG and MPEG algorithms in them. It was a cool job. It was funded by the Japanese. I got a lot of interface with the Japanese. But after a year and a half of it, we grew and grew. When I left, I think we had 80 or 90 people. One day I just went into my boss there and I said, the owner, and I said, I'm having fun, but I miss doing games. I was writing a submarine game in my spare time at night, right? Because I missed doing games so much. The stuff we're working on, nobody's going to see this stuff for 3 years. And at that time, that was terrible, right? Every game I'd ever worked on, we'd done in a year or less. But now I'm working on stuff that we're going to finish now, but really people aren't going to be using it for 2 or 3 years. So that to me was terrible. I need to work on stuff that people are going to see. So he understood and said, wish me well. We're still friends. But I went looking for a job, and I actually found a job with Konami of America, which was a Japanese company. So I'd had this experience with this other startup that was Japanese backed. So I'd gotten to go to Japan a few times, work with the Japanese. So I went to work for Konami. And I went there and I ran their internal and external development for America. So I had a lot of SKUs, had a couple of producers. We worked on probably 15 or 20 games a year, but a lot of them were being done in Japan. So we really weren't doing that much, but giving them feedback. But we also had games that were being built in America, so we were outsourcing games to other development companies. And we had a little bit of internal development at Konami. Konami also had not only a console, because they were Nintendo, they were the biggest third-party Nintendo provider. And the Super Nintendo had just come out, so we were doing a lot of Super Nintendo stuff and some handheld. But they also had a PC division. And so we made PC games in addition to the console games. The PC division manager, Brian Dimmick, was a great guy, and he was more than willing to teach me stuff about the business side of that. He included me, and I, helped me, get games that were the right games for what he could sell. And about halfway through my time at Konami, he quit. And they didn't have anybody, so they made me the PC manager, which meant I went from being a game development manager to a salesperson. So I literally had to go to Walmart and to Electronic Boutique and to all the Ingram, MicroD, and all these distributors, and actually sell our products to distributors. So I became a traveling salesman on top of my development job, going all over the country hawking games. And while that's sounds kind of terrible if you're a development guy, it was actually the best experience I ever had. And learning how games got sold and bought informed me a lot about how to be a better developer, because suddenly I realized the people buying the games, literally they'd look at the box and say, I'll buy that game, but I won't buy that game. They wouldn't look at the letters on the box that said what the game was or how it was, or turn it over and look at the screenshots. They would literally look at the box and say, I'll buy that box, but I won't buy this box. And the positioning and that branding was so important to a retailer, much more than the content of the game. If you're going to get a game sold, you better figure out how to sell it before you throw it in front of the retailer, because if you throw it in front of the retailer in the wrong box, nobody's going to buy it. Nobody will ever see it. So Konami, is 1991, 1992 now. We're kind of up to that time frame. I loved Konami. Halfway through my time at Konami got into trouble, meaning that, they used to be the cock of the walk. They were awesome. They were sold more games than anybody else. Their Super Nintendo games were not as strong as their Nintendo games. They were coming off a 4 million unit seller of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the NES. And then as the Super Nintendo came up, the numbers weren't as big. So Konami got really worried about that and bought in a Japanese person to replace the American person who used to run the company. And he was a banker. He wasn't even part of Konami. He was a banker for Konami who got put into a job running a game company. And his job was to make sure that he had control of when we made or lost money. So you had to fill out a form, and the form was a form that said, I want to do the following thing, and it will either make this much money or lose this much money. So if you needed to do a return, you'd have to fill out a form and go, nobody's buying this game. We're going to have to take returns. This guy would have to sign it. So I became an expert at filling out forms to both make and lose money, getting stuff done. And the prideful thing I have about working for Konami is I could work harder than the Japanese at that time. I was much younger and full of energy. So that's the only thing that impressed the Japanese, if you're willing to work harder than they are. But I did enjoy my time there. But it did get kind of wearing after a while, because we were working not for a game guy, we were working for a banker. And toward the end of 1992, somebody I'd worked with at Konami knew somebody else who was working at Game Tech, and they came to me and tried to recruit me to run their development because they were going to go public in a year or two. And they needed somebody experienced in running game development. So Game Tech, which was down in Florida, at North Miami Beach, literally flew my wife and I down there. And it was here's the thing, it's like middle of the winter in Chicago. If you're from Chicago, there's snow piled up, you're freezing your butt off, shivering, even in your house. It's just cold as crap in the winter in Chicago, and windy. And they flew us down, and we land in Florida. It's December. The flowers are blooming. It's, 75 degrees outside. It's gorgeous. It wasn't a hard sell for them to get us to think about moving to Florida. And they made a great offer, and so we decided to move to Game Tech. Game Tech was interesting because here's a company that did a lot of licensed properties. So Konami had a few licenses, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and like the sports licenses at the time. So I'd had some experience working with some of the licensors. But Game Tech had Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy and Family Feud and a lot of game show titles, just a ton of them. And they did original stuff too. So their goal when they brought me in was, they said, we need to double our development output, because if we can get more stuff, we can sell more stuff. So I was only at Game Tech for a little over a year, and in that year, we did over 120 different SKUs starts, and many of those finished. Meaning, when I say SKU, if we had a title that was on 5 different platforms, that'd be 5 SKUs. So of the 120, there were probably, to be fair, maybe 35 or 40 SKUs, or 35 or 40 titles that we started or finished during that time. And I got to work on all different kinds of platforms, handheld, all the console platforms, PC, obviously. And the company just, was going crazy. We were shipping easily, 4 to 5 titles a month, sometimes more. and so it's a machine. You're feeding that machine. You got to get more and more titles out. And I got to work with developers all over the world, not just in the U.S. Got to work with many developers in the U.S. as a publisher to a third-party developer, but also with many of the developers in Europe. So I got to travel to Europe, work with a bunch of great teams in the UK, several on the continent. And it was a great job in many ways. It was go, go, go all the time, though. There was no shortage of stuff. I think that's the job that I actually became a paralegal on, because we did so many contracts. I finally, all the contract work finally just kind of sunk in, and I knew how to do game contracts because we did so many of them so quickly all the time. At the end of that, as the company was about to go public and doing the road show, the owner came to me and asked me to do some stuff that I wasn't really comfortable with, because I figured, if you go on the road and you're talking to investors and you might be not quite telling exactly the truth, that might not work out for you later. So I decided to leave the company before the exit, which was really sucky because I could have made a fair amount of money if I had stayed for the exit. But it was clear that, I might have to compromise some stuff I didn't want to compromise to do that. So I don't have any real regrets about it in the big scheme of things. I enjoyed doing the work I did, but I wasn't going to do what they were asking me to do. So at that point, I did something crazy. I started my own development company. So that would be my third startup company, and it was called Alliance Interactive. And what it is, I got the rights back to Harpoon, I got the rights to some other games that I'd worked with before, and we started publishing games. And we were building a new game also inside the company, which I was programming on, and I had some other folks with me working on it. That company ran just about a year. So we had our first year, we sold about $900,000 worth of product. And at the end of December, there was a distributor who I won't name, who were a bunch of New York scumbags. And they said, oh, by the way, all that product you sold us, we're not going to pay you. Why are we not going to pay you? Because you probably can't sue us to get the money. We're going to hold it until we're sure none of it's coming back. We're never going to pay you, basically. And that was, of course, all the money we needed to operate on for the next few months. So we, in effect, went out of business pretty quickly after that. So another valuable lesson, watch who you do business with, and be careful to work with people who have some semblance of ethics. But so, I'm winding down that company. We never took that company into bankruptcy. What I did was I just shut down all the expenses, and we just paid everybody from the money we got in. We had some licensing revenue for, I guess, 3 or 4 years. We had revenue coming in, and I would just split it up among the creditors. And I didn't get everybody paid off, but I did get a big portion of it paid off over that time, which was nice not to have to take the company fully into Chapter 11 or 7. Just kind of wound it down slowly. So now I'm kind of at loose ends, right? I've started a company, the company's failed. I'm sitting in Florida. I interviewed for some stuff in Florida. I turned down a job at Sportsline, which would have made me a ton of money. My buddy Rich Vogel, who we'll talk about later, interviewed for the same job about the same time. We just didn't know each other. And we both turned down the job because neither one of us were really sports freaks. And it was the kind of job where you probably needed to be a sports freak to take it. But that company later got sold to, I think, CBS. Everybody in there made a ton of money. So I missed one of my little .com possibilities there. My buddies at Kesmai, I'd published their game at a couple of different places. Air Warrior, John Taylor and Kelton Flynn were the principals at Kesmai, had been bought by Rupert Murdoch, so they were part of News Corp in 1994, 1995, right at that cusp. And they also bought a company called Delphi, and they were going to build an AOL competitor at News Corp, and Kesmai was going to be the games part of that big online service. And so Kesmai was a company that had like 10 guys for, the last 5 or 6 years. And all of a sudden they were going to like 40 guys in no time at all, 40 guys and gals. So they said, hey, we know you, we like you. Why don't you come here and manage our development thing that's going to blow up and go crazy? And so I went there and consulted for a couple of months, and then went, I like those guys. I like what they're doing. It's online stuff. which was cool. I had never worked in online games before Kesmeyer, not really. And they said, come on down. And I spent the first year at Kesmeyer learning the online business from these guys who'd been doing it since 1982. So they had more than a decade of experience servicing online customers. And what I learned was a bunch of the stuff I knew from the regular business was counterintuitive to doing online games. So I learned a lot, particularly in that first year when I was kind of getting up to speed. While we were ramping up and building all kinds of online games, we built, of course, Air Warrior. We built BattleTech 3025. We built Legend of Kesmeyer, which was an upgrade of their Island of Kesmeyer MUD. We did a Harpoon Online, so I had some hand in that. I was still programming while I was at Kesmeyer in addition to managing. And we started a bunch of other games too and worked with some third parties like Mark Jacobs, whose company previous to his current company did online games, and a bunch of those games he did for for Kesmeyer, which ended up being published on a service called GameStorm, which was a web service for games. I worked at Kesmeyer for almost 5 years, and it was a great, great gig. Lots, learning everything about the online business, working on all these different online games, taking games that had seen a couple of hundred people in them and getting thousands of people in them, getting games onto AOL, and suddenly we'd have 40,000 people play our game in a month when, we never had a month where 4,000 people had played a game. It was really great. And learning through that scaling too, as the scaling changed, we learned new lessons. And I really liked it. And I was under contract with News Corp, and one day they said, "Oh yeah, we're not going to extend your contract." This is, after I've been there over 4 years. And I went, "What?" I wasn't even thinking about a job. And then a friend of mine reached out to me and said, that the Ultima Online people are looking for somebody to run Ultima Online, to be the VP of Online for Origin Systems. And I said, that sounds pretty cool. So I talked to the recruiter who was recruiting for it and got sent over there, and I did the interview, and I went, wow, that'd be a cool job. And I really wanted that job. And they made an offer, and I kind of refused it. Then they, because it wasn't good enough. Then they made another offer, and that was good enough. And so I went and started at Origin. So now it's 1999. Ultima Online's second age is just shipped. And I started Origin in March of 1999. And working on Ultima, so I'd been playing Ultima for probably a year before that. I thought Ultima was, just a fabulous game. So I was excited to be working on a game that I thought was awesome. Even though it had all kinds of problems. It had lots and lots of problems. And of course, for a guy like me who's an engineer at heart, someone with problems is fun. So it was fun to be working on Ultima Online because it had a lot of problems and because it was a big deal. It was a big deal in the online space. But I think it was my second week at Origin. I got pulled into a meeting, and the meeting is with the execs there. They go, we're working on this Ultima Online 2 thing, and it's going to be out in like 9 months, which was bogus. Of course, it wasn't even close to being ready. But they said, we need a plan from you to shut down Ultima Online so everybody will go to Ultima Online 2, which wasn't the same game as Ultima Online at all, right? It was a different game with a different kind of focus and thrust. It was a better graphics. It was 3D. It was pretty awesome in a lot of ways, but it wasn't Ultima Online. It was a subset feature-wise of Ultima Online. And, I first said, "Are you guys serious? Are you kidding? Are you kidding? Are you just playing with me?" They go, "No, we really want a plan. We need a plan to shut the game down so we can force everybody to go into Ultima Online 2." I said, "Well, if you're serious." And if you guys remember Ultima Online, it was full of psychopaths. Basically, the game taught you to be a bad person and to be a psychopath. So, already, the people who worked on Ultima Online had been threatened by the players in real life. People would show up in the office and beat up people outside. There was lots of crazy stuff going on with the players in Ultima Online already before this. And I said, well, if you guys are serious, I need to quit today because I'm not going to be here when the people who are playing Ultima Online come to kill you. And then they thought I was playing with them. I thought they were playing with me at first. Now they think I'm playing with them. And I told them, I'm not playing with you. I think those people will come and kill you. Not all of them, but just enough of them to where you should be very afraid of this.